Good morning and welcome to another installment of Coffee and Tea with AARP. This bi-weekly program is an opportunity for AARP staff and volunteers to speak with some of Connecticut's top decision makers and ask about issues that impact older residents. My name is Anna Doroghazi and I'm one of the policy directors at AARP Connecticut. I'm excited to be joined today by a terrific co-host, Jean Keith, an AARP Connecticut volunteer from Hartford. Jean has been an AARP Connecticut volunteer for about 2.5 years and is involved with our state and local advocacy work, as well as our fraud watch team, car fit, and driver safety. Jean, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
It is also my pleasure to introduce today's special guest, the City of Hartford's Bicycle and Pedestrian Coordinator, Sandy Fry. Sandy has a background in civil engineering and has worked as a transportation planner for the Capital Region Council on Governments and the Greater Hartford Transit District. She's been with the City of Hartford for about 5 years. Sandy, hello, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
So just to start off, Sandy, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what your role is within Hartford City government?
Sure. I work in the Department of Development Services in the Planning Division. And I mostly do projects related to transportation. So when we have street improvement projects, usually the design of the project starts in the planning department and then goes over to the Department of Public Works for construction. So in that role, I'm a senior project manager working on those projects. I also am the city's bicycle and pedestrian coordinator. And in that work, one of the big things I do is try to coordinate with other departments whenever we have an opportunity to implement improvements to our bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure and bicycle and pedestrian safety as part of another project. We try to do that. So a big thing is when roads are being repaved, we'll look to see what can we do. What recommendations from our bike plan can be implemented as part of a simple repaving. So it's a lot of fun and it's a very satisfying job to be working on these issues.
Great.
Sandy, why should cities care about walkability and outdoor spaces?
You know, that I love to get that question because the first thing I'll say is anybody who makes a trip is a pedestrian at some point in that trip. Even if you take your car, take the bus, you have to walk to that vehicle. And so providing safe means for people to walk, pleasant means for people to walk where they need to go is important. With cities, there's an even bigger need in that most cities have a relatively large population of people who don't own cars. And in Hartford, with our low income, that leads to more than a third of the population, a third of the households in Hartford do not own a car. So these are households that are dependent on walking, biking, using transit to get around, to access their daily needs, to access the economy, to be productive. So it's really important that we're providing the means for them. And then when we just think about our society as a whole, there's a movement that's called the 8 to 80 movement, and it's thinking about 8-year-olds and 80-year-olds. And how do those people get around in your community? And how welcoming is your community to those people? I like to think that if you picture a walkable community, you just think in your mind, what does a walkable community look like? You will picture a very nice place to live, a place you would be happy to live. You also asked about public spaces, and it's interesting, you know, sometimes we forget about public spaces, but they're kind of the third space for us. There's home, there's work, and there's being out in the public and how can we interact. And so providing benches for people, providing small spots that people can gather, paying attention to our park spaces, of course, but also these small gathering spaces is really important. So it all adds up to creating a community that is livable, accessible, and safe for all of its residents.
That's great. And I love, that idea of what's good for an 8-year-old is good for an 80-year-old is one of the concepts that AARP has really embraced when it comes to what we call our livable communities work. So how do we make great places for people of all ages to live? I have young kids that are kind of just past stroller age, but if you create public spaces that are accessible for wheelchairs or people with other mobility issues, that helps everybody. It helps the mom with the stroller. It helps the person trying to deliver packages. And it's really interesting to think about how can we create these spaces that are going to function for everyone. And sometimes we don't even notice the art and the design that goes into that. We just know that we're really happy to be in a space and that it seems to be working for people.
Yeah.
So all of that said, I mean, it sounds great, right? And I think a lot of people would say, we want to live in a city that's easy to get around, where it's nice for pedestrians, it's nice for bikers. So, given that a lot of us want these things, what are some of the challenges for cities that want to make themselves more walkable and safer for pedestrians?
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to say before I answer that question is it's really wonderful to have AARP on board with its Livable Communities initiative. Early in my career working on bike and ped issues, sometimes you feel like, oh, you're the lone voice. And I think it's so important to remind people that as you age, the importance of that livable community, the accessible community, being able to walk is so important, and it really strengthens what we're trying to do in a small department in the City of Hartford. So I really appreciate that. But as some of the challenges, like in a city like Hartford, our streets are pretty much built. We're not building new streets. So for us to put high-level bicycle facilities in that the 8 to 80 would feel comfortable in, that are in some way physically separated from traffic, that's an expensive proposition, because we might have to move curbs, we might have to completely redesign our sidewalk space to put the bike facility up there and provide proper separation from the sidewalk. So that's part of the challenge. In the City of Hartford, we continue, it's probably surprising to people to know that we continue to install ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, curb ramps, because that's been the law for quite some time, but it takes a long time to bring all that infrastructure up to where we need it. Some challenges, like with pedestrian access, we'll have people say, just put a new crosswalk in from this entrance to the church parking lot over to the entrance to the church. But we can't do that cheaply. We can't just go out and put paint down. We have to have curb ramps that on each side, so that everybody will be able to use that crosswalk, not just the able-bodied, not just people who aren't pushing strollers. So I would say probably the big thing is our built environment. And there's a lot of competition for the space on a street. If we could take parking off of every street in the City of Hartford, both sides, we would probably be able to do great things in terms of sidewalks, pedestrian accommodations, and bike accommodations. But it's a lot of negotiation and balancing needs, balancing interests that need to be done. The other thing with a city like Hartford that developed when it did, a lot of the multiple family housing and single family housing also didn't have driveways, didn't have accommodations for cars off the street, because at the time they were built, people didn't have automobiles that needed to be housed. So that puts more pressure on that precious street space. But we're trying some new things in terms of trying to slow traffic down in neighborhoods to make the walking environment safer. and then also to provide for a safer bicycle environment.
Sandy, what are some of the things that Hartford has done in recent years to improve pedestrian safety and make Hartford a more walkable and bikeable city?
We've done some really interesting things. Some basic things, like whenever we rebuild a street, do a streetscape, we make sure we have a good walking surface all the way from the back of the curb to the back of the sidewalk. Because when you drive around the city, you'll see some places where there's like an awful bituminous strip, an asphalt strip between the curb and the sidewalk. There's grass growing up through it, or maybe there's a grass strip. We try to, sometimes we'll put brick in there, but we try to make all of that a usable walking surface. So we're really focused on that. We've also installed what are called bump outs or curb extensions, where at the corner, you build out the curb, shortening the distance that pedestrians have to cross, also making pedestrians more visible when they stand on that bump out to cross, and then finally slowing down the traffic. You have to go slower when you go around one of those than if you have a big, broad curve at a corner. We've also been continuing our investment in upgraded ADA ramps at corners. We've installed a lot of pedestrian countdown signals where the pedestrian can see how many seconds are left to cross at a traffic signal. Trying to think, and some other things we've done, just general traffic calming. We tried something totally new for us in the Frog Hollow neighborhood last summer. It's called a diagonal diverter. What you do, where two streets come together, on the diagonal, you install something that prevents any of the traffic from going through, either north-south or east-west. They both have to turn. Has to be done in a residential neighborhood where there's not a problem with people getting access to their property. But what it does is it eliminates cut-through traffic and speeding traffic. One of the biggest problems we have with regard to pedestrian safety is speeding traffic running up onto sidewalk, or speeding and hitting somebody who would never expect the vehicle to come as quickly as it has. So that anything we can do to slow down speeds is positive for pedestrian safety.
Great, thank you for that. And it's so interesting to hear you talk about these things, because I think we've all experienced a lot of what you're talking about in our lives, you know, walking around cities or walking around our own towns. But I don't think everyone has the vocabulary to talk about, or even to notice, like, oh, that was a great curb cut, or oh, that was a really good pedestrian bump out. But these things really change our behaviors, and they influence how we move around a space. So it's been, you know, really interesting, you know, for me at least, to learn more about this and to understand, you know, oh, no features of this city just happened. There was so much planning that went into all of this. You know, so Sandy, one of the reasons that Jean and I know you is because you are a leader in Hartford's effort to implement something called a complete street plan. So could you tell us a little more about what a complete street is and what Hartford's complete street plan entails? Because there are a lot of those, you know, how do we influence behavior sorts of pieces in that plan?
Yeah, complete streets is a term that was coined in the early 2000s. And it really captures a lot of what we're trying to do, because what complete street says is a street is not complete unless it provides for all users, not just motor vehicles, but also pedestrians, bicyclists, people who use transit, and individuals of all abilities and all ages. Starting in the 1950s, we really focused our street design strictly on moving traffic. We were thinking about the motor vehicles only. And pedestrians sometimes were perceived as sort of a bother because you have to give them some time at the traffic light. Bicycles were not given serious consideration until the 70s. Some people did, and then that got sort of dropped and picked up again 20 years later. but we had that single focus, and it led to streets that aren't safe for everyone and don't really complement the communities that they run through. The streets should be part of the community, and Complete Streets tries to really capture that again. In the City of Hartford in 2016, the council passed a Complete Streets ordinance. That Complete Streets ordinance says we will, in all our transportation projects going forward, apply the principles of Complete Streets and provide for all users. Now, what's difficult is when 2016 came, there were some projects that were already under design. And so, case in point, Albany Avenue doesn't have bike lanes, the newly rebuilt Albany Avenue. If that had been designed after 2016, it would have been different, but it had been designed before, and it was going to be extremely difficult to try to pull that back and redesign. The other thing that the Complete Streets policy or Complete Streets ordinance said is that we would develop a Complete Streets plan. So in 2019, we adopted a bicycle plan, and it's very specific. It says on this road, we will have this type of facility, on this other road, another type of facility. It's got a network for the whole city. The Complete Streets plan that we have developed and which is being considered by council at this point, I think it will go to the council subcommittee at their June meeting, the beginning of June now. It's much more general, more of sort of a policy document. It addresses how should we be designing our traffic signals? How should we be marking crosswalks? I have a real issue myself. I don't like pretty crosswalks. I like bold, noticeable, visible crosswalks. That's where people are safe. So we've tried to document that so that as we move forward, as other streetscape projects are undertaken, this is the guiding document. This is how you do things. We hope to have a companion document at some point, a Complete Streets design guide that will go to very specifics. What does a bump out look like? What is sort of our palette for sidewalks in a residential neighborhood versus a commercial district? But that will come later. This Complete Streets plan is much more policy level, talks about traffic signals, street markings, talks about amenities that should be provided at transit stops. It addresses how are we going to get from here to there? How are we going to actually implement the bike plan, implement traffic calming throughout neighborhoods? And it identifies a need for a neighborhood-based process to do that. To really understand what the issues are in the neighborhoods and how they can be tackled. Because it is a very, very local problem, generally. Speeding traffic, you know, the solution on one street will be different than another street. It includes some elements of encouragement, encouraging people to walk and bicycle more. And we're hopeful that it will get passed, and it's a document then that developers, other city staff people can use. It will institutionalize a lot of our thinking at this point.
Good. So why should older adults, perhaps senior citizens, care about Complete Streets?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons. One interesting connection that Complete Streets has made over the last 10, 15 years is to public health. If people are unable to get out and walk short distances to do regular daily activities, we end up with a lot of people who don't get exercise. The best way to get exercise is to have a part of your daily activities, walking to the post office, walking to the grocery store. Now, as people age, certainly, I have a mother who's 93. She cannot walk very far at all. But there's such a spectrum of people who need to continue to be active, need even sidewalk surfaces, need those curb ramps. And the other thing I think senior citizens should be engaged in this whole idea is to generalize I think they care a lot about the younger generations also, and would want to see their grandchildren able to be active in their communities, and would want to see communities that are livable for all. I like to think, as I get into my more senior years, that wisdom comes along with that, and the importance of complete streets to really provide for everyone. And maybe a particular complete street ends up slowing traffic slightly, might take you a little bit longer to get from A to B, but the benefits that come with that for all the other road users just are way beyond what you might sacrifice in a little bit of speed.
Yeah, and that's something that I've heard from, other AARP volunteers or just people out in the community, that it's also really hard to separate, pedestrian specific activities from everything else. That, I remember having a conversation with someone, one older adult at one point, who told me, I was so excited, my town just redid their bus routes. There's a bus coming near my house now. I'm so scared to walk to the bus because there's not a sidewalk between my house and the bus. So all of this other planning is not as effective as it could be, because we've forgotten the thing that gets somebody actually to their door.
Yes. Yeah.
And you can have great services 200 feet away, but if people don't feel safe navigating those 200 feet, it almost doesn't matter, because they're not going to use it, and it's not the investment it could have been.
Right. And the easy choice a lot of times is the thing we're used to, which is walking out of the house, getting into the car and driving wherever. And I think for reasons of climate change, for reasons of health, personal health, general public health, enabling more people to make the choice to walk or bicycle for regular activities really is so beneficial for all of us.
Yeah, and I love the point that you made about public health and how, I know so many people, and I have been that person who gets in the car to drive to the gym to get my exercise, where we can walk for exercise. That's so good for us, and it should be, so pleasant and so accessible. And a lot of times it's really not. So what are some cities that people might be familiar with, or cities that you've been to that have done a good job of adopting this complete streets idea?
Well, I think Boston is a city that has adopted a very complete streets design guide. They have a manual to guide them in all the projects that they do. Now, I'm sure you can point out lots of things there that are not particularly complete streets, but I think they're moving in that direction. It's always making the motion in that direction. New York City has done amazing things with reclaiming asphalt, excess asphalt, and giving it back to pedestrians, giving it, street side seating, really has made such a difference in large areas like Times Square, but also in very small areas where they just repurposed some pavement and made it into a little park space. Philadelphia is a place that I have been visiting because my kids live there, so I've been visiting with some regularity. And they've done a lot of the same things, reclaiming some space and giving it back to the people who live in the neighborhood. And you look at it with the tables and people seated, and even though they didn't really do a physical change yet, the curbs are still there, but you can't even envision hardly what it had been before. So I think they're making some good strides. I think, you can look around the city of Hartford. There are many places in the city that work really well. And where you do feel comfortable walking. It's the width of the sidewalk, it's the surface of the sidewalk, it's the accommodation at the corner, being thoughtful about crossing maybe mid-block, that there's a need to cross. So it's not hard, but it just takes some focus to make the improvements. And as you were talking earlier about, the importance of people thinking about walking for regular daily activities. As I get older and my joints get little fussy, I remember motion is lotion. You got to keep moving those joints to be able to have them to move. So it's good on many levels.
Sandy, for those Hartford residents who are listening, what can they do to provide feedback on this plan and show support for it?
People can take a look at the plan. It's not real lengthy. It's a pretty quick read. And they can reach out to city council members to let them know their thoughts on the plan and the importance of continuing to develop complete streets in Hartford.
And lastly, anyone who's been in Hartford recently may have noticed that there's suddenly a lot of bright yellow scooters all over the city. Can you explain where the scooters came from, what they're there for, and how they work?
Sure. The scooter share operated by this firm, Super Pedestrian, they're provided at no cost to the City of Hartford and cost $1 to unlock, 35 cents per minute to ride it. The initial deployment has been 100 scooters in downtown Hartford. That will expand to 200 to 300 throughout the city over the next few weeks. They wanted to iron out the issues at first. And some of the issues we have is if somebody rides a scooter, you can ride it anywhere within the service area, drop it off anywhere. If somebody drops it off on a narrow sidewalk, they're probably not thinking about the width of sidewalk that should be left for good pedestrian passage, for wheelchair passage, for stroller passage. So we're trying to work out those issues. And the scooters, we're very pleased with the scooters in the company. Super Pedestrian was started by some really smart MIT robotics guys and girls, I assume. And they've developed the scooter. They've been very focused on developing a good scooter for the urban environment. There have been a lot of scooter companies that dumped a bunch of cheap scooters in cities out in the West, in California. You might have heard about that. And we were a little concerned. We didn't want scooters that ended up being worse for the environment than driving in a car. So these scooters have batteries that have a pretty long life. They also have a lot of internal maintenance checks. So the scooter is checking itself, taking itself out of service if there's a problem and sending a message back to the operations center that the scooter has a problem. We've been very happy with the attention that Super Pedestrian is paying to the operation. We're meeting on a weekly basis with them to talk about what's going on, any problem areas we see, any improvements that need to be made. Anybody has any concerns about the scooters, there is on the 311 app, there's a scooter category where they can share that. And that's important to know because it's hard for us to be on the ground everywhere to see what's going on. When you end your ride, you have to take a photograph of how you parked it. So they will be able to deal with people who are not parking appropriately. And if they have a problem and people don't correct, they can take them off the system. So that's what the scooters are. We hope people will try them out. We hope, as people come back to work more, that they'll really see it as a convenient way to get to a meeting across downtown, connecting Asylum Hill offices into the downtown, connecting people to bus stops, providing that last mile trip. So maybe you don't have to transfer between buses. Maybe you can use the scooter to do the last little bit of a trip. You can tell I like the scooters.
No, and I'm excited because I have the last mile. It's probably a last like 3/4 of a mile problem between the bus route that I can take from my house to downtown and where the AARP office is.
Yeah.
We're still all working from home, but I'm looking forward to making the scooter part of my commute.
Good.
Well, Sandy, thank you so much. Before we let you go, I just want to, also briefly mention a piece of legislation on the state level. You spoke so well to some of the work that's happening specific to the City of Hartford. I want to also give a quick plug to House Bill 5429, which is a very big, very wide-ranging pedestrian safety bill. So just wanted to give a quick plug to that as well. But thank you so much, not only for being with us today, but for all of the great work that you've been doing and continue to do in Hartford. And also, you've spent a lot of time behind the scenes and offline educating me and trying to talk me through some of the work going on in Hartford. So that is greatly appreciated. So once again, thank you so much to Jean Keith for being the Coffee and Tea co-host today, and to Sandra Fry from the City of Hartford for taking some time to be with us today.
You're welcome. It's great to talk with you and to share information more broadly. I appreciate that.
Great, thank you. You can join us for another episode of Coffee and Tea with AARP in 2 weeks at 9 a.m. Thank you very much for folks who are watching. If you want to learn more about what's going on with AARP Connecticut, you can visit aarp.org/CT events to find out some more of our great virtual programming that's going on. Thank you again, Sandy. Thanks again, Jean, and have a great day, everybody.